Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the commemorative event. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and rolling with the few schedule changes we've had this weekend. We got some beautiful sun out here and a little bit better weather than maybe we would have had yesterday morning. Most of you guys know me. I'm Mike Flynn. I'm the president of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. We're having a great festival this weekend, and we got a beautiful day ahead of us today, and a little bit more tomorrow. Concluding with the big wrap party over at the Worthen. I do want to make one sort of housekeeping announcement. Given that we moved the commemorative event to Sunday morning, the Mystic Jack tour will be starting at 10:15 instead of 10 to give people time to get over to the St. Louis de France Church after this event, which will be wrapping up a little bit before 10. And we got a whole bunch of other great stuff happening today. We got Frank Briska's Escape to New York event over at the National Park Visitor Center Theater on Market Street, and that kicks off at 12. And then over at the Worthen today at 1:30, in lieu of our traditional Serious Amram Jam with David Amram not able to make it up this weekend, we're doing an open jam for Kerouac and Amram today. And my main man, Guitar George Hutchinson, will be helping me out with that. He runs he helps to run the open mic over there, you know, typically, so bring it. We won't be adhering, if you've been to the Amram Jam in the past, we have that sort of time crunch. We'll be expanding it. It'll be a little looser and a little bit freer. So bring your creativity, and we're gonna fill that space this afternoon in David's absence at the Amram Jam. So without any further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to my main man, my predecessor as president of LCK, and a guy who's got a beautiful program put together for us this morning, Mr. Steve Eddington, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, thanks. There we go. Thanks, Mike. Welcome, everybody here. This is 24 hours later than we had planned on doing it, but it's a little breezy, a little chilly, but on the other hand, we got clear blue New England skies here today, so welcome. We're going to do three things here this morning. We're going to do a remembrance of John Dorfner, and then Brian is going to offer some of his thoughts on his memories on the very first LCK Festival in the summer of 1988, which was held on this same spot. It was the dedication of the Jack Kerouac Commemorative. Those of you who saw the film, the Sharples Go Moan for Man, over at the Middlesex Community College Center, you saw some clips of that. So Brian's going to offer some memories on that. And then, too, we're going to finish up by doing some readings from Visions of Gerard. In addition to this being the 35th anniversary of the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festivals, this is all the 60th anniversary of the publications of Visions of Gerard. So we'll hear some readings from that, and that will make a nice segue, as Mike mentioned, into the Mystic Jack tour, which I hope a number of you can make it over to the St. Louis Church to do. So let's get ourselves underway, and the first thing I am going to do is wipe a big piece of egg off of my face here. Cliff caught me at the Worthen yesterday and said, I've been talking with Hank Garrity, and Phil Chaput has not departed this earth. At this, that's the good news. I thought I really did. I apologize. I thought I had the right information on that, but to quote Humphrey Bogart in the movie Casablanca, he said, I was misinformed, and so I was. Or we could also invoke the well-known line from Mark Twain, who said, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Well, the same thing goes for Phil. I hadn't seen him a number of years. I don't know what the state of his health is, but he still remains on this side of the curtain. But someone we do want to especially remember this morning, someone I did not actually have the pleasure of meeting, but had some correspondence with him, just because of our various our connections. I was very saddened to learn of his passing. Do you know how old he was? How old 70. 70? Okay, thank you. And but someone who's also knew John and was close to him and even dedicated his tour to him yesterday was Kurt Flynn. So Kurt, you're on.
Good morning, folks. as I was organizing my thoughts, I said, I might as well write this out. I'm neurotic enough that I figured I probably better get it down, because I didn't want to forget any of the things that I thought essential to mention about John. So first off, just an anecdote. Several years into my friendship with John, I happened to see a photo he posted to Facebook. We were Facebook friends. And the photo was of this jug-eared, grinning, mischievous-looking, cowlick infected boy of about 10 to 12 years old. And I stared at the picture dumbfounded, because the first thought was like, this is John. This is a picture of John. And I chuckled a little bit. But then I had this nagging sense as I was looking at the picture, but it doesn't look like John entirely. In fact, I think it reminds me of someone else, but I couldn't place a finger on who I thought the photo looked like. And then it hit me. I was like, oh my God, this is Huckleberry Finn in the picture. It was like this perfect idealized image of Huck Finn, and I thought, okay, John's gonna want to hear this. So I wrote a response to the post wherein I expressed this, epiphany of mine, and within seconds, John wrote back a response that was laconic perfection and entirely John. This is exactly what he said. He said, Huck Finn, eh? I like that, brother. So, after I mentioned Facebook, despite the fact that both John and I are old-fashioned pen-to-paper sort of guys, our entire relationship was digital. It's one of my great regrets that I never got to meet him for an eyeball chat. Now, that meeting, when it's in the works, we planned and talked about it for many years, but the prospect never came to fruition. And I think at least part of that had to do with the illness later in John's life. Now, I'd originally tracked him down through social media in order to both discuss his two Kerouac books, Visions of Rocky Mount and Visions of Lowell, Steve mentioned. And I wanted to thank him for the seminal work he'd done in researching Jack's life and times. In fact, folks, and I don't know if you know this, but Visions of Rocky Mount and John's advocacy for Kerouac down in North Carolina, where he lives, helped get Jack elected to the Twin County Hall of Fame in 2012. The Rocky Mount Hall of Fame, and for those of you who know anything about the city, three most famous exports for that city are Buck Leonard, the great Negro Leagues baseball player, Thelonious Monk, and for the period of time Jack lived there, because he had family there, Jack Kerouac. So John did a lot of legwork, and he was surprised, in fact, when ultimately they let him in. But one of the great privileges of his Kerouac-loving life was, seeing the picture go up in the Hall of Fame, and not just seeing the picture go up, but they had covers of a couple of Jack's books, and they had the cover of pictures of Rocky Mount, Visions of Rocky Mount up there with the other pictures. So anyhow, in the process of discussing some of these things with him through the years, I asked him, how did all this Kerouac stuff come about for you? And to make a long story short, I got the thumbnail bio here. John mentioned his blue-collar upbringing in Kingston, New York. We're both natives of New York. His deep, mysterious, and haunting bond with his milkman father. His love of the outdoors and nature, his honorable and heroic, though conflicted, stint in the Navy during the turbulent days of Vietnam, his resultant wanderlust after he came out of the military and the cross-country hitchhiking of the early 1970s, and then the note-perfect timeliness of his discovery of Kerouac while working for a book distributor in Oregon. Now, this is actually a quote from John. I thought he could say it better than I could. It says here, my father passed away in April of 1976. I went back to New York in the spring after his death. During that summer, I drove up to Lowell for the first time to check it all out. I had to go because I'd read everything I could find about Kerouac and his world. As soon as I arrived in Lowell with my camera, I just knew I'd write a Lowell book. It was all there, just as Jack described, exactly. Count Condu's castle on Snake Hill, the Wrinkly Tar Corner. I even found Textile Lunch in Pawtucketville with a big sign hanging over the front door. It was like Disney World to me. It was a dream already a long time ended, as Kerouac says. I fell in love with Lowell that first day, really within the first few hours. It's much different today than when I first traveled to Lowell. Back then, people looked at me like I was crazy when I started talking about Jack. Guys, this was 1976. Bear in mind that this predates LCK, the kind of renaissance of popular interest in Kerouac in the 80s and scholarly interest in the 1990s. So, you know, John kind of got here first and did some stuff that ultimately ended up being very inspiring to me. So he took a bunch of these pictures on that trip and several others during the next few years, wrote these poetic ruminations to accompany the photos, and then published this wonderful little book. It's essential. You should have it. And, you know, for all of the things you could say critical, you know, one of the things I always like to tell John is, you do know that the is spelled T-H-E and not T-E-H. You occasionally catch little typos and things like that. But it was the book that inspired me to come here the first time myself, which resulted in me meeting Roger Burnell and on and on and on. So my deep dive research never would have happened if it weren't for John. Now, I do have one major bone to pick, one kind of annoyance I need to tell you about with John. When I would come to Lowell, I always, you know, I want to try to match the descriptions in the book to the actual sites in town. So I did that year after year after year, and I love to get home and look through the pictures. But at the time, I didn't know the folks here in town as well as I do now. So the only person I could correspond with about this stuff was John. So I wrote him this message one time to John. You're not going to believe this photograph I got. I said, I did some research. I said, you know, there's an alley between what was the old textile lunch and Andre Gervais' old grocery store in Pawtucketville, you know, and I got just the right time of night. I got there, I got this wonderful angle on the photo, and I had just the right amount of shadows, maybe even a hint of fog there. I sent the picture off to him. He wrote me back, and he was always very good about writing back quickly. He says, oh, that's a great photograph. But I noticed he'd attached a picture to his message. And I looked at the picture, and it was a picture taken 30 years earlier that he'd already rendered of the same spot. It was like, I was like, give me the discovery, you know, at least a little bit of it, you know. So but he was very, very generous about sharing his own research. And in fact, I like to say John has took the only photograph I know of, unless somebody out here knows more, the only photograph that I know of the old sandbank, which was a play area that Jack and his friends used to, you know, their war games and their adventure games and their Moon Man games that they would play in the after hours. So John would always send me pictures. He said, oh, you took a picture of that too? Like, oh, great discovery. So I did want to share with you guys, and I hope I can get through this. John did write the two Lowell books. But this is a book I wish more folks who like Kerouac would read this, because it very clearly stylistically is influenced by Jack. But this was John's most personal book. It's called Milkman's Matinee, and it's a remembrance of his father. And, you know, unlike lots of memoirs nowadays about parent-child relationships or familial relationships, John had a wonderful family life. I mean, he adored his father. He loved his family. But I did want to read this one brief passage here. This is scene 3. He even organizes it a little bit the way Kerouac organizes that second section of Dr. Sachs. So, this is John talking about spending time with his father as a kid. Foxhall Avenue. In the dark morning, as the fog lingers over St. Mary's Cemetery in the rain, there's Father at the wheel of his milk truck, looking like a saint, and is in fact a saint, now that I think of him gone. Dad, that's what we called him. Loved the guy who now is in heaven, and surely so at that. Like I said, I see him now as if he still exists, and how I wish he could have waited around for little Jamie and Jolie, my daughters. Man, I know he would have thought the world of them, and maybe he can see them from his perch in the sky. Either that, or can feel them running on the brown earth over his grave at the Fairview Cemetery. Strange name. Father was unique. He was so much different from anyone I've ever met. I guess we all think that of our dads, though, don't we? In all my wanderings, I've never met anyone like him. The way he seemed to care about things, little animals he really loved and protected, even though he was a great hunter and killer of big bucks in the Atwood Forest. He cared so much for others, for other people's feelings. And I guess that may be the reason he committed suicide. One spring dusk up at Atwood Peak, he came home from work and took a nap like usual, Sat down and ate supper at the table in the dining room right next to that beautiful 8-pointer we got Thanksgiving morning of 1965. I was with him, some kind of omen, and something I'll always cherish for as long as I live. That morning will be with me on my deathbed someday when I come face to face with God and my old man. So Father came home, took his nap, ate his meal, did some work out in the garden, then disappeared. Got in his car and took a ride up to Atwood Peak, a spot of woods that runs parallel to the New York City water pipelines, a spot of woods some half-mile from where he was born, and a place he loved to explore as a child. He told me stories of how he'd hike around these hills on Saturdays when he was a kid, a spot where he shot 4 or 5 bucks in the autumn and summer of his life. He pulled his car into the parking spot he's always parked at, off the country road a couple hundred yards, a spot he'd take us kids to so often. We'd have family picnics at that spot during the 1950s. But on this April dusk, there would be no more picnics, just death, a death in the spring dusk. And I often wonder if Dad was remembering all those mornings me and him would get up early on Thanksgiving and sit there in the car and talk as we waited for the blackness to lighten. I wonder that quite often. It's one of those things that I'll never know the answer to. Yeah, it's a great passage, folks. So, to conclude, John loved lots of things. He was a guy just exuded love. He loved the 1950 Chevy in which he and his buddies drove to Mardi Gras in '73. He loved music, particularly the songs of the Beatles and the Stones. And one of my most enduring images of him shows John in blissful meditation, plucking out some melody on his Gretsch hollow-bodied electric guitar. He loved antiquarian books. In fact, he amassed an enviable collection of William S. Burroughs' first editions. He loved the poems of Sylvia Plath with all their stained majesty and surgical precision. But above all, and I mean seriously, way above all, he loved his family. He loved his father, despite the voids the man planted in the middle of John's soul. And moreover, he loved and adored his wife Diane, to whom he was married for 45 blissful years. He loved his daughters Jolie and Jamie, and his grandsons Connor and Drew. In fact, most of the pictures he posted the last couple of years of his life were him interacting with his grandsons. He took that bond very, very seriously and derived a lot of joy from it. That he lived to bring all of that love to a full flowering makes me indeed very happy. So to end, John's favorite of all Kerouac's books, and it's another one of the reasons we bonded, is Dr. Sachs. So from Dr. Sachs for John. I've seen Dr. Sachs several times since at dusk in autumn when the kids jump up and down and scream. He only deals in glee now. I went along home by the ding-dong bells and daisies. I put a rose in my hair. I passed the grotto again and saw the cross on top of that hump of rocks. Saw some old French-Canadian ladies praying step by step on their knees. I found another rose and put another rose in my hair and went home, by God. So until we meet again in the golden eternity, John, thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful. Let's take a moment just to reflect and honor the life and the memory of John Dorfner. Thank you. Blessed be. Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit now. As we said, this is the 35th anniversary of our Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festivals. The dedication of this commemorative was held in the summer of 1988. Someone who was very instrumental in both making this setting happen and here for those festivities. I asked Brian Foye, who's a Lowell guy but living in Kentucky now, if he'll come up and share a few of his thoughts about what happened on that day. Brian, thanks for being back here with us. Thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thanks for that, Kurt. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having me today. I'm very honored to be here. I was certainly here in 1988 on stage for the event. I was sitting behind Dick Howe, Congressman Atkins, Allen Ginsberg, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. But many others, Paul Marion in particular, but also Richard Scott and Steve Osella, played a much larger role in bringing the park and commemorative to life. And many since, Steve, Larry, Meg, Roger, John, Judith, Mike, have played a much larger role in keeping the park and the idea behind it alive and flourishing in Lowell. I'd like to start by offering a few words on the two people we're remembering this year, one who passed away and one who is very much alive, though he would get an enormous kick out of the idea that I would be talking about him in the past tense. I did meet John Dorfner, of course, and knew John. As Kurt said, he was a native of Kingston, New York, who lived and loved living in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He had a true, pure beat spirit. He loved to travel. He was good friends with John Allen Cassidy, and if you came across one, you usually came across the other. John told me he had visited Lowell in the 1970s and had been here back when UMass Lowell was the Lowell Textile School. And John had a true appreciation for that alchemy of Kerouac's Lowell, the way Kerouac's words transform the reality of the city, while simultaneously the city transforms Kerouac's words on the page. John's first books, Kerouac Vision of Rocky Mount, was an inspiration. Later, John wrote another great book, Kerouac Visions of Lowell. It was in Visions of Rocky Mount, however, that John captured a little-known part of Kerouac's story, the time he spent in North Carolina, living with his sister Nin, her husband, and her son Paul Blake Jr., and writing, among other works, Visions of Gerard, which we'll celebrate here later today. John's research on Kerouac at Rocky Mount and his kind demeanor made him a welcome honorary Lowellian. Phil Chaput, on the other hand, doesn't need any honorary titles. He is Lowell. Phil is filled with Lowell pride, that unique fuck it spirit that thrives in paradox. We welcome refugees and immigrants, but distrust outsiders and blow-ins. We fight over neighborhood differences that mean little, if anything, as soon as you leave the city. We take a world-class writer, perhaps the most imaginative writer America has ever produced, and celebrate the fact that he scored a touchdown in the Thanksgiving game against Lawrence. Phil loves those paradoxes because he truly loves Lowell. When I first met Phil, which I want to say was in 1985 at the Lowell Public Library, I think he was a bit leery of my formation of a nonprofit charity focused on Kerouac. We talked, and I think he saw the possibility that the idea could be corrupted. But we spent time together and shared a lot of connections, and soon he was all in and deeply supportive. We became friends, and I learned a lot from Phil. If you get to know Phil, you soon know that he is deeply committed to making Lowell a great place to live, that his word was his bond, that no job is too big, and that he always has your back. On the night before the dedication of the commemorative, there was a candlelight vigil walk from the Smith Baker Center to the commemorative, led by Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence and many others. It was Roger, I think, who came up with the idea, but it was Phil who brought me over to Ymido's Candles near the Hafner station and hooked me up with 500 candles and the piece of paper that went underneath them, which I forever will remember is called a bobesh. Which brings me to the dedication of the park and the commemorative on June 25th, 1988, or maybe a time just before the dedication. I had just come back from college and was living in Lowell and working with Mike at the National Park Service, and I had an idea of establishing a nonprofit in 1985. when it was originally called, I called it the Corporation for the Celebration of Jack Kerouac in Lowell. I met with Kerouac's lawyer in Lowell, Jimmy Curtis, and he gave me incorporation papers I could copy from the Hellenic American Society in Lowell. He told me just replace Kerouac wherever it says Hellenic American Society. Jimmy also told me great stories of how Kerouac would come into his office the day after every Sunset Strip episode aired on television, and Jack had lengthy, single-spaced, legally sound briefs charging the show with defamation and copyright infringement. So, to build momentum, I wrote letters to Kerouac's peers, like Alan, Bob Creeley, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Herbert Huncke, Diane DePrima, Joyce Johnson, Carolyn Cassidy, John Cleveland Holmes, others, and also celebrated writers like John Updike and Kurt Vonnegut, asking them to be part of an honorary board. I provided a return envelope and an endorsement letter for them to sign, joining our honorary board. I was hoping to hear from a few, but instead I heard from everybody. Nearly all of them contained handwritten notes, including one from Kurt Vonnegut about his time together with Kerouac when they both lived in Hyannis and Hyannisport. Amazing. John Updike agreed to come to Lowell for a reading, and his endorsement was a signal to Lowell's cultural elite, something that actually existed at the time and was covered quite extensively by Mary Sampis and, as Paul mentioned, Sampis Scoopies. And it was a sign that we could be trusted. Our incorporation papers in 1985 had 3 goals. 1, establish an annual festival in Lowell. 2, build a park or monument to Kerouac in Lowell. And 3, pretty much anything related to, quote, promoting the joyful spirit of Jack Kerouac in Lowell. We were very much focused on a park and monument, but in fact we, the board that formed, and I met Roger at the Grotto, and he quickly agreed, he and Reggie quickly agreed to join, and others that agreed to join locally and actively work. We had little direct influence. It was really Richard Scott and Paul Marion, Paul working for the Lowell Historic Preservation Commission, who knew how to bring together several state and federal agencies for the enormous task of tearing down the great gray warehouse of eternity and bringing Ben Waitana's sculpture to life. What we provided, now officially known at that time as the Corporation for the Celebration of Jack Kerouac in Lowell, doing business as Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, was national and international focus on the park through our honorary board. All were invited to the dedication, and nearly all of them came. So you would think with so many beat luminaries and Kerouac connections coming together for the event on June 25th, 1988, that every moment of the weekend would stand out, pinned like a post on social media. But this was a time when memories were analog. And what stands out about the dedication weekend is the point I've been working through in this conversation, the transformation that occurs when local Lowell and Lowell folks interact with Kerouac's texts. The dedication weekend expanded that idea in a direction I had never even expected. For here were the characters of his books, almost like they were wearing name tags, walking the streets of Lowell. Leon Levinsky, Carlo Marx, Irwin Garden, Yuri Gligoric, Denny Blue, Lorenzo Monsanto. This brought the idea of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac full circle, and so certain moments of the weekend still stand out. One is Lawrence in his funny sailor hat, showing up at my apartment in Lowell, asking for directions to the park. He had my address from our letters, of course. The year before, he'd written me a long letter proposing his own architect for the park. And could I possibly influence Paul and the team to switch to Lawrence's design for the park? I had to navigate those waters. He also was seeking permission to publish Poems All Sizes, which hadn't been published yet at that time. And he sent me a manuscript of the Canticle of Jack Kerouac that I ended up publishing as a hand-sewn, and by that I mean by me, chapbook, and we published it in 1987 and featured it at the Smith Baker Center in 1988. I remember Lawrence's focus on the business of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. And while he was a great artist, he was also someone who cared and knew deeply about book sizes and covers and cover design. I'll tell one story I hadn't prepared. Through Phil, we also got to know a great local Lowell person called Mr. Paul Dunnigan, who ran a bookstore across the street from Nicky's. And Mr. Dunnigan also lived on the same street as Jack Kerouac. And Jack convinced, and Jack would come over after Nicky's and get a ride home from Paul Dunnigan many nights of the week. And Jack convinced Paul Dunnigan to, Mr. Dunnigan, to fill the book, one shelf, with New Direction paperbacks, and to fill it with paperbacks from City Lights bookstore, so that when Jack came over from drinking at Nicky's, he could sit and read what he wanted to read. And then when Mr. Dunnigan was done his work, he could give him a ride home. And when I introduced Mr. Dunnigan to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, he said, "Oh, would you take all those fucking books back?" I remember Alan in a cream-colored suit. And I remember more vividly the night before, since he was staying at my parents' house, actually in the bedroom I grew up in and shared with one of my older brothers. I remember him sitting on the floor, 174 Foster Street in the Highlands, chanting really, really loud, sitting on the floor, and om, om, om. And you know, this is 1985, before everybody has a Calm app in their phone. And it was just staggeringly weird to me to see that in my parents' house. Bless my parents, who I saw quickly, my dad passing by in that video as part of the movie. And they were, of course, great friends with Alan as well, too, and wholly accepting of everything he brought. I also remember Alan on stage whooping and yelling in enthusiastic support of anything anybody said, including Senator Tsongas, who I don't think ever had anybody, certainly not a beatnik, sitting behind him, whooping encouragement, and he would turn and look every once in a while. I remember, side note, the legendary John Wiener's coming up on his own on a train. I think Jim Dunn was with him, and he brought a stack of zines called Fag Rag, which are now highly valuable in book circles, but at the time was enormously challenging to some of the thousands of people, 1,000 people roughly from Lowell who were there at the event. And it's the irony that if every person who complained to me about had kept one, they'd now have a couple of $100 in rare books in their possession. John was a true genius. I met him through Alan that day, and Alan said, "Well, Brian, John went to Boston College in 1960, and I graduated in 84. And Alan said, "This is Brian. He went to Boston College." And John said, "I thought you looked familiar." Stella Sampis was there as well, too. Very dignified. Some of her first time speaking publicly about Jack, and the family, of course. Tony was there and very supportive. What I remember about that, and Mike Worm may remember this as well too, is the week before she had come up to Lowell, and my job for the park was helping Mike and the team collect artifacts that could be used in the Mogan Center to tell the history of Lowell from immigrants and refugees perspective. And she, as Kerouac's coming, of course, from the diaspora from Quebec, were part of that story in a very nuanced but important way. And she brought Jack's typewriter and the backpack that he had used in On the Road. And so she brought those in and showed up and said, "I knew your parents from the Lowell Sun. My mom worked with Jack at the Lowell Sun. My dad worked at the Lowell Sun for 35, 40 years. And she said, you know, how is your dad? How's everything at home? It was very much a local personal connection. And then, oh, by the way, here's the backpack Jack Kerouac took on the road. And so, you know, what do you do with it, right? And as she left, I was like, well, I guess I can open it, you know, like, what was also interesting was that it's an old green army type of rucksack, right? I think you think of backpack going on the road today with a contemporary backpack. Inside the backpack was everything but a pair of old socks. Like, there were little containers that unfolded and made larger containers. There was a canteen, there was cooking gear, there was everything. It was, and I assume now it's in the museum, it was chock full of Jack's stuff, and that was a really great and wonderful moment. I remember as well too Jan Kerouac here, looking lost, and I remember she took the tour with Roger and got on the bus, sat in the front seat, and was very much an honored guest, but deeply lost. I remember Ray Manzarek with Michael McClure. Michael, the night before, left an amazingly angry message on my voicemail full of curse words because I hadn't done something. So I talked to Alan about it and he said, oh, now you're like one of us. That's what Michael does. he kind of freaks out before big events. But what I liked about Ray Manzarek and Michael McClure was this connection again to local Lowell folks. We went to the Smith Baker Center to test out the piano in the afternoon, and a friend of mine worked for Art Ramallo as a janitor, sweeping the floor and putting the chairs out at the Smith Baker Center. And on the way up there, I had talked to Ray about his days in the Doors. How could you avoid it, you know? And did he ever play any of the songs anymore? I said, no, absolutely not. He had a little bit of a story about that. And we got there, and my friend, John, call him Beef Mo, he says, Ray Manzarek, light my fire, light my fire. And Ray Manzarek sits down at the piano and proceeds to play Light My Fire. And then he looks at me and he says, the dude just had to have it. So that was a really great moment. The genius of the commemorative is that it captures Kerouac's words in the brick, granite, and stone of Lowell. The original intent of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, starting when it was founded as the corporation for the celebration of Jack Kerouac and Lowell, was to capture that alchemical activity of reading Kerouac in Lowell, to see the very sidewalk under your feet transformed into Kerouac's wrinkly tar sidewalk, then to look up and see Lowell transformed again, the world now filled with appreciation and possibility. For Roger and Father Spike, this transmutation was spiritual, liturgical, sacramental. And what were Roger's bus tours, if not a traveling Catholic Mass, to celebrate that Eucharistic transmutation and make the everyday holy? For Phil and many others, it's a transformation into that ineffable essence of Lowell pride. For others, it was a source of personal artistic inspiration and an ever-present creative spark made manifest by the heroic David Amram. For many, many others, it was the transformation of shared experience into community. And returning to Lowell infrequently over the past 25 years, it's been moving to me to see the community in action, celebrating each other, lifting each other up, and remembering others. Thank you all for being here 35 years after the dedication. Thank you for being part of the ongoing and unending transformation that occurs when you read Jack Kerouac and Lowell. Thank you for keeping the idea alive.
Oh, thanks, Brian. That was really, really wonderful. Just great to sit there and listen to it. I think after 35 years, and I've just been feeling very humbled and honored to have been a part of it with so many other the people I've gotten to know in Lowell Celebrates Kerouac over the nearly 30 years I've been involved with it, and just to have had a small part in that. It's been that's been very moving for me as well. So thank you again, Brian. We got one more base to touch, one more anniversary to celebrate. It was 60 years ago this year that Jack's novel Visions of Gerard was published. He'd written it several years earlier. He wrote it in North Carolina, near where we already heard from about John Dorfner. He wrote it in the closing days of 1955 and into the early weeks of 1956, and it was published in 1963. It's about, as you well know, it was about his honoring his brother who passed away at the age of 9 when Jack was 4. So what we're going to do, I've asked 6 people. Why don't you come and join me in the order that you're going to read. We're going to read just several passages from Visions of Gerard, and then, like I say, those of you who want to go and see the actual place we're writing about, you can do that. All right, Mike is going to. Where's Mike? There you are. You got the first reading.
All right.
All right.
That's why I don't know the order. Gerard Deleuze was born in 1917. A sickly little kid with a rheumatic heart and many other complications that made him ill for the most part of his life, which ended in July 1926 when he was 9. And the nuns of St. Louis de France parochial school were at his bedside to take down his dying words, because they'd heard his astonishing revelations of heaven, delivered in catechism class on no more encouragement than it was his turn to speak. Saintly Gerard, his pure and tranquil face, the mournful look of him, the piteousness of his little soft shroud of hair falling down his brow and swept aside by the hand over blue serious eyes. For the first 4 years of my life, while he lived, I was not Jean Toulouse. I was Gerard. The world was his face, the pale, stooped disposition, the heartbreakingness of the holiness of it, and his teachings of tenderness to me, and my mother constantly reminding me to pay attention to his goodness and advice.
It's a cold, crisp morning in October. Gerard is going to school with his books and bread and butter and banana lunch and an apple. I watch him going down Beaulieu Street alone. Gangs of kids run around. At the end of Beaulieu Street is the large gravel play yard of the Green Public School, where, because kids weren't Catholic, the nuns have been telling Gerard and Nin and the kids of the St. Louis de France school that they have tails concealed beneath their trousers, which for some of us, I for one, seriously believe. At that street, Gerard turns right to go to St. Louis, which is right there along 3 wooden fences of bungalows. First, you see the nuns' homes, red brick and bright in the morning sun. Then the glooming edifice of the schoolhouse itself, with its long plank sorrow, halls and vast basement of urinals and echo calls. And beyond the yard, with its special, I never forget, little inner yard of cinder gravel.
Then the church, St. Louis de France, a basement affair then, with concrete cross. And inside, the ancient smooth pews and stained windows and antique mahogany confessionals with whiny drapes and ornate peat doors. Gerard and all the boys went to confession on Friday afternoon to prepare for Sunday morning, when the church hoped to infuse them with some of the perfection embodied as implied in the concept of Christ the Lord. I can see him entering the church. He doffs his hat, trails fingertip in the font, does the sign of the cross absently. The fortunate priest, Père Anselme Fournier, receives Gerard in the confessional. My father, I confess that I pushed a little boy because he made me mad. Did you hurt him? No, but I hurt his heart. The priest is amazed to hear the refinement of it, the hair-splitting, elegant point of it. He'll make a priest, he inner grins. I'll never malign the church that gave Gerard his blessed baptism and waved its hand over his grave. Reading 4. Christmas Eve of 1925. Tyneen and I gaily rushed out with our sleds to a new snow layer on Beaulieu Street, forgetting our brother in his sack, though it was he who sent us out with the injunctions to play good and slide far. Look at the pretty snow outside. Go play, he cried like a kindly mother, and we bundled up and went out. I still remember the quality of that sky, even though I was only 3 years old. Over the roof was that blue, magic Lowell blue, that keen winter northern knife blade blue of winter dusk so unforgettable. Perfect for the silhouetting presentations of church steeples and of rooftops and of the whole of Lowell. These mighty skies bending over Lowell and over Gerard as he lay knowing on his deathbed, rosaries in his hands, pens on paper by the bed, pillows under his feet. Outside is December's big parley with night, and it's Christmas Eve, and his heart breaks to realize that it will be his last Christmas on our innocent, mistaken earth.
I don't remember how Gerard died, but in my memory, which is limited and mundane, here I am running pell-mell out of the house about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and down the sidewalk of Beaulieu Street, yelling to my father, who I've seen coming around the corner, woeful and slow with straw hat and coat over arms in the summer heat. Gleefully, I'm yelling, Gerard est mort, as though it were some great event that would make a change, that would make everything better, which it actually was, which, granted, it actually was. But I had thought it had something to do with some holy transformation that would make him greater and more Gerard-like. He would reappear following his death, so huge and powerful and renewed.
We all get in cars and they slowly weave the parade. And out we go on the long, slow drive along the Merrimack River by sodden trees and all their foliage looking sad, to the bridge at Tingsboro and across that to Nashua, entering that little city. My parents come from town, where I remember the long gray wall and the glistening boulevard in the rain, and they haul the coffin gently down to grave ropes, for all the gentle look have no gentle job to do. My father's curly hair is moist and uncombed. The lids of his eyes are down, where they'll always be. Ma and Tina, sitting with me in the black car, burst out sobbing. As the coffin downward disappears, I turn to them and say, well, why are you crying? Dijon, you don't understand. You're too young to understand, they wail. Seeing my rosy face, my questioning eyes, I look again, and the men have stepped a pace back, expectant. Old gravedigger picks up his shovel and closes the book.
Thank you to all of our readers. I think that's a book you have to hear the read to understand, to get how powerful that book is. You have to hear the words. It takes you beyond what's on the printed page to actually hear how Jack memorializes his brother. Got one passage to finish up with. Backs up a little bit. The reference here to Savas Sabakis is Sammy Sampas. It was only many years later when I met and understood Savas Sabakis that I recall the definite and immortal idealism imparted by my holy brother, and even later with the discovery of Buddhism, awakenedhood, amazed recollection that from the very beginning I, whoever I was destined to meet, to learn, to understand Gerard and Sabakis and the blessed Lord Buddha and my sweet Christ too, to awaken to pure faith, one bright truth. All is well, practice kindness, heaven is nigh. Jack said everybody goes home in October. As we know, he went to his eternal home in October 1969 in St. Petersburg, Florida. He was brought here for his funeral mass, held just up the street a ways at the St. Jean-Baptiste Church. As he concluded, and Father Morissette concluded his eulogy to Jack with these words: "Our hope and our prayer is that Jack has now found complete liberation, sharing the visions of Gerard." Let's take just a moment to reflect on the honor the life and memory of Gerard Kerouac, and to reflect on how that life, how his loss, his death affected Jack Kerouac throughout his life. Thank you. Blessed be. Thank all of you for being here this morning. And now, if you would like to see the places that you just read about, those of you who can make it over there, we're going to reconvene at the St. Louis de France Church.